We're going to Disney World. Kids, we're going to Disney World. The question would be, well, our children might have been, really? But the other question might be, well, when? Well, we don't know when we're going, but we're going to Disney World. Talk about having a bunch of kids who would be on your case constantly. Now, when is this going to be? When is this going to be? We're told at times that something is going to happen, but we're not told when it's going to be. And that just keeps our minds twirling. Now, it can be something far less involved in going to Disneyland or Disney World. In our political system in our nation, the laws say every 4 years we elect a president. He knows in November, usually, whether he has won or lost. And he knows that on a certain day in January, he's going to be in his 4-year term. In nations through the centuries that have had kings and those that still do, it's an open-ended question. King Charles knew that he would become king. He didn't know when. It took quite a few years. His mama lived a long time. David, a young man, still a teenager, was anointed to be the next king of Israel. And he was anointed, he was chosen, because Saul, the first king of Israel, was rejected by God because of his disobedience. When God selected David, he chose a man who was after his heart. And so here's David, a young man. He's told he's going to be king. He's anointed. Do you think he might have asked when? I think that may have rolled around in his mind a little bit. Last Sunday we saw David facing the giant, facing Goliath, being victorious. David entrusted God, trusted in God. Says, God is going to win this for me. And so David immediately gained some fame. One commentator said David's victory over Goliath was a turning point in his life, which opened the way to the throne. Bill T. Arnold wrote, David's victory in the valley of Elah made a national hero of him and entitled him to the hand of Saul's daughter. But it also aroused feelings of jealousy in Saul, which set in motion the events that fill the rest of 1 Samuel. David, still a young man, is now a hero for Israel. He had been promised, whoever would defeat Goliath had been promised the hand of Saul's daughter. But Saul very quickly became jealous of David. Now, approximately 20 years elapsed between David's anointing and his becoming king. First, he will become king of Judah and eventually king of all Israel. And those years were challenging and eventful. This morning, we're going to take a very quick survey through chapter 18 through 30 of 1 Samuel. In chapter 18, we find that David and Jonathan, Saul's son, very quickly become friends, very close friends. Jonathan would be David's brother-in-law, but they were friends, close friends. Saul was jealous of David, would make several attempts to kill him. Jonathan would run interference. Also, after David's victory over Goliath and the Philistines, we read in verse 7, And the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Saul had struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul did not like that at all. Now, Saul, early in his reign, had gained great victories over the Philistines. But he chose to do things his own way. He disobeyed God on a number of occasions. And he had been rejected by God. After he died, there would be no more king. There would be no kings from his lineage. And so Saul seeks to do away with David, the competition. Chapter 18, verses 10 through 14. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul, we're told. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. David is waiting to be king. He's not rushing it. Saul is fearful of David. David is more popular than he is now. David seems to be receiving the blessings of God, whereas he was not anymore. We see that Saul is trying to do David undeserved harm. But in doing that, he only succeeds in moving him toward the destiny of the crown. The rejected king is constantly frustrated. The future king is always successful. In chapter 19, there's another attempt to kill David. These attempts will go on and on. There are quite a number of them in the closing chapters of 1 Samuel. And as this goes on, the distance between the two men, the two anointed ones, David and Saul, continues to increase. As surely as David is to become Israel's king, Saul is just as certainly running to his own destruction. At first, Jonathan doesn't think Saul is out to get David. But after a while, he realizes that this is the case. And Jonathan even warns David about Saul's efforts to kill him. David becomes a man on the run. He first runs to Samuel the prophet. He enlists the aid of Jonathan in staying away from Saul and escaping from Saul's efforts. In chapter 21, David realizes that his only option is to flee from Saul, or he would be killed. David is about 24 years old when he fled from Saul. David is growing in power, while Saul continues to spiral out of control to even lower depths of shame. In chapter 22, David has befriended a priest. The priest assists him. When Saul finds out that the priest has assisted Saul, he comes out. There is an exchange between them. The priest was not trying to be unloyal to Saul, but he's accused of that, and Saul orders that he and the other priest be killed. It's interesting that Saul's own men are unwilling to perform this task, that a foreigner has to actually do the killing. Saul is so fearful for his throne that he kills the priest of God. the contrast between Saul and David increases. Saul continues to reject God's call while David responds to God's call. And the consequences of the two attitudes differ greatly. David inquires of God before making important moves, while Saul depends on rumors and espionage. This is a case study in contrasting approaches between someone who is seeking to perform God's will and someone who is seeking to avoid God's will. Saul continues to pursue David. Chapter 24, we come to that occasion where David is in a cave. Must have been a nice big size cave. And Saul is looking for him with his men. And Saul goes into the cave to relieve himself. And David is actually able to come up and cut off a piece of Saul's robe. Now, actually, he had the opportunity right then and there to kill Saul. His men were in favor of that. Notice, beginning with verse 4 of chapter 24, "And the men of David said to him, Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you. Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And afterward David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. But afterward, David also arose and went out of the cave. And he called after Saul, My Lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Behold, David seeks your harm? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. He had the opportunity to do away with Saul, but he realized it is not my place to kill the Lord's anointed. Chapter 25 very briefly states that Samuel died. Samuel the prophet, so important in the events of Saul becoming king and David becoming the future king. It's also in chapter 25 that we have the account of Nabal and Abigail. Nabal was one of those sorry individuals. We've met a few of those in our life. Nothing would make them happy. David had been good to Nabal, to his shepherds. He asked for something in return. Nabal said no. And David is ready to take care of Nabal. But it's also the case that sometimes you have a couple, and one of the spouses is pretty bad and the other is pretty good. Nabal had a good wife, Abigail. And she entreated David not to do anything to Nabal, not to take his own revenge. And David listened. It's only a few days later that God takes care of Nabal. He dies. And David takes Abigail to be one of his wives. David learned that if he withheld the avenging sword, God would act on his behalf. When we come to chapter 26, we have another effort of Saul to capture David. There are some who think that this account and the previous account about the cave are the same story. That is not the case, I don't believe. Here are Saul and his men. They're out to chasing David again. And they're asleep in the camp. And they apparently slept soundly. David, one of his men, sneak into the camp at night. Again, here's the opportunity to take Saul's life, but David is not going to do that. He takes his spear and his water jug, takes them out of the camp. The next day, there's a bit of distance between David and his men, Saul and his men, but they're within shouting distance at least, and David says, basically, see, I had the opportunity to do you harm again, and I did not. Why are you pursuing me? He even sends the spear back to him. Well, this is the last straw, which proved to David that he would never be safe as long as he was in the land of Israel. And this would be the last meeting between these two competing anointed ones, the last time Saul and David would see each other. On this occasion, chapter 26, verse 21, when David confronts Saul, Saul says, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I've acted foolishly and have made a great mistake. Well, David chooses not to trust Saul. Perhaps wise on his part. What we have is the rest of the story of Saul's life and of David's actions at this time. David flees to the Philistines, the enemies of Israel, and convinces them that he will work for them. It's rather interesting that he basically protects the tribe of Judah from their enemies and doesn't really work for the Philistines so much after all. Saul is preparing for another battle against the Philistines. God no longer speaks to him. Saul seeks the counsel of a medium. That's interesting because all of those had been outlawed in Israel. But he finds one, assures her that everything will be okay. And they call up Samuel. But Samuel does not give good news to Saul. His end is coming. Meanwhile, the Philistines prepare to go to battle against Israel. And some of the Philistine soldiers remember that David had fought against them. And so David is not allowed to go and fight with the Philistines against Israel. His wives, living in one city, Ziklag, are captured with their children. David and his men go and rescue them. They defeat the Amalekites. Very quick journey. Normally, if I was doing a series on David, we would have a lot of sermons in more detail. But the point of this message today is to show David the king in waiting. In those years, those few years, he had a lot of experiences. And the wait gave experiences that would shape his rule as king. He learned some valuable lessons during that time. God had already determined Saul would meet an end. The kingship would not continue in his family. And yes, David would be king. I suppose the important lesson for us is to always seek to do God's will, whatever the circumstance. To always remember that when we are beset by our enemies, that we should let God do the revenge part, and we should not.